Please help me in welcoming author Reyna Grande.
Hola, buenos días. ¿Cómo están? So good to be here with you this morning. What an honor that you guys took the time from your busy schedule to read my book. I really hope you enjoyed reading it. I hope it gave you a little bit of inspiration for your own journeys, because I know all of you guys are on your journeys. You've all faced obstacles, and it's really great to be able to share my story with you and just to give you a little bit of inspiration as you continue to work towards your futures. And I wish you all the best. I know one day you guys are gonna be up here on this stage sharing your story with the next generation. So I want to make sure I give you guys enough time to ask me questions. So I'm just going to give you a really brief presentation, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. And there are no right or wrong questions, so whatever you want to ask me, feel free to do so. As you know, I'm literally an open book. So I write about immigration. That's a topic that is really close to my heart. It's a very personal topic for me to explore because I am an immigrant, and I love writing about my immigrant experiences and speaking up for my immigrant community. And I really hope that through my books, I'm able to connect with other immigrants or with children of immigrants. But also, I want to help people understand, who we are as a community, and to try to encourage them through my work to see us as the human beings that we are. And one of the questions I get a lot when I do presentations is, why do you write? And to me, that question has actually had different answers through my journey as a writer. Because when I first started to write, I did it for different reasons than why I write now, for example. So one of my favorite authors is James Baldwin, who said, you write in order to change the world. If you alter even by a millimeter the way people look at reality, then you can change it. And I feel that that's a really wonderful way to see our writing, because writing has the power to change people's view of reality, to change the way people see the world. And I strive for that now as a writer. That is one of my goals, is to write books that help people see the world differently. But when I first started to write when I was 13, I wasn't writing to change the world. I was writing to save myself. And for me, I was so lucky to discover writing because it was my way, the only way I survived through all the things that I went through. And as you know, when I was a teenage girl, I was suffering from trauma, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what was wrong with me, because back then I didn't know the words trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, all of those clinical terms. I didn't know that was what was happening inside my body, and that was causing all this inner turmoil and chaos. I didn't know those terms, so I learned to express my feelings through stories, and that's what helped me survive that trauma. And the trauma that I was dealing with was first, the trauma of having been born into extreme poverty. That being born into poverty creates a lot of difficulties, and for me, having come from a family of very limited means, even to this day, I'm still kind of struggling with that. And I was also dealing with the trauma of having been separated from my parents. And to this day, I'm 43 years old, I'm still coming to terms with that separation and the long-term consequences. I was also dealing with the trauma of not having a family, the trauma of being a border crosser, and I'm still dealing with that. I was dealing with the trauma of having, come to a country and gone to a school that didn't know how to help immigrant children like me. And you guys read my book, so you know what my experience was like when I started school and, not being able to speak the language, and my teacher just put me in a corner and ignored me for the whole year. So I was dealing with that kind of trauma too, the language trauma. And because I was undocumented the first 5 years that I lived in this country, I was dealing with the trauma of deportation, being afraid that my parents would get deported or I would get deported and my family would split up again. And as I mentioned, the trauma of having to learn English, and because of the way I was forced into learning English, I had to, at some point, also give up my mother tongue in the process. So these were the traumas, assimilation, becoming an American, adjusting to my new reality and my new country and my new culture. So these were all the things that I was dealing with. And that's why writing was so important, because when I turned to writing, it wasn't to change the world or to speak up for my community, or I wasn't using language to push for social change or social transformation. It was for me. Writing was for me to be able to cope and survive and thrive in this situation that I found myself in. So one of my favorite writers is Sandra Cisneros. And I didn't know at the time that I was actually kind of following her philosophy when it comes to writing, where she says, don't write about the things that you remember, but write about the things you wish you could forget. And that's exactly what I was doing through the years. I was writing about the things that I wish I could forget, because that was the only way that I could transform those things into something positive, instead of allowing all of those things to transform me in a negative way. So I was very fortunate because, I would have been perfectly happy just writing for me, for personal reasons. But I had the good fortune of, when I graduated from high school and I went to Pasadena City College, I met my English professor. And it was because of her that the idea came to me about pursuing a career, where I went from being an aspiring writer to an emerging writer. And it was just a culmination of all the hard work and all the obstacles I had to overcome to make that dream a reality. And it was just a really beautiful feeling to get paid for my writing, to know that I could have a career telling stories and writing about my experiences. And when I experienced that, and I saw how my writing had allowed me to transform myself from being, a person who came from poverty, from being an undocumented immigrant, being the first in my family to graduate from college, to becoming a published author. I mean, my writing allowed me to do that transformation. And when I was able to transform myself, I realized that then I could use writing to transform my community, the way James Baldwin sees writing. So that was a really beautiful lesson for me to learn, of how, in order for us to know what change is like, what transformation is like, we have to start with ourselves by transforming ourselves, and then using what we learn to be able to transform our society in which we live. So that is when, for me, I started to write for another reason. and it was a reason to use writing as activism. And that's where I am now at this stage of my writing, is trying to use it as a way to speak up and to advocate and to fight and to celebrate my immigrant community. So I have learned to use language, to use stories for personal transformation and for social transformation. And I want to leave you with a quote by Toni Morrison, who unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago, and she was one of our most treasured writers, especially writers of color. And this is her call to action, is for artists. You know, when things are wrong in the world like they are right now, we need to hear that call to action. And she says, you know, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. So I want you guys to hear that call to action, okay? I want you to think about the skills and the talents that you have and how you can use those skills and those talents and those passions to transform yourself, but also to find a way to use that to transform the community and the society in which you live. Because that is how we together, working together, can finally create a world where everybody is treated with respect and with dignity and with compassion. So it needs to start with you. Transform yourself first, and then transform your community. Yes, yes. Diana has been a very important part of my life because she is my #1 fan, you know, and she supports me in every way with my writing. She reads everything I write and she proofreads it. She's an English teacher, so I really appreciate her help in proofreading my work. Although sometimes she even proofreads my Facebook posts. So it's nice to have somebody there. Like every time I write, I send it to her, and she reads it and gives me comments and helps me make it better. So I'm so grateful to have that, because as a writer, you always need to keep revising, and it's so nice for somebody to be there helping you in that process of revision.
Do you have any advice for getting over a writer's block?
Getting over writer's block, yes, I do a few things. One, I read my favorite books, because every time I pick up, like, you know, House on Mango Street, for example, and I read it, it reminds me why I wanted to be a writer, and it fills me up with like inspiration and beautiful language, and it makes me want to go write. So I reread my favorite books. I also do a lot of gardening, and as I'm gardening, I'm thinking about my work, because a lot of the writing happens here. You know, so if you could, you know, as you're washing dishes or you're doing your laundry or whatever, if you can keep working on it here and trying to figure out and tap into the story, eventually, like, you'll have that aha moment, and then you'll go and finish it. So the trick is to always try to stay connected to your creativity. You could go watch your favorite movie, you know, and get inspired through the story. You could listen to music that brings out the emotions that you're trying to capture in your story. So there's different things that you can do to unlock yourself. Were there things that I wasn't able to fit into the story? Yeah. There were a lot of things I didn't put in the story, because when you write memoir, you cannot just like put every single memory into the book, because otherwise it loses its form. You know, memoir has to be very carefully shaped, and you do that by selecting the memories that you're going to include, and the memories that you leave out are just as important, you know, as what you put in. So there were a lot of things I didn't put in the book because they didn't fit into the narrative. But there was one chapter that I had written and then I had to take it out because the book was getting too long. And that chapter was one that I really liked, but I still had to take it out. And it was a chapter that I wrote about when we were still living with my abuela Evila, and my uncle, my mom's brother, came to visit us. And he had brought us a bucket of ice cream. And my abuela Evila wouldn't let him see us and give us the ice cream, and she told him to leave, that she didn't want my mother's no good family around, and she said, you know, vete. So then my uncle went around the property to the backyard, and we were back there playing, and he gave us the bucket of ice cream. And he left, and just when we were about to eat it, my grandma shows up. And she took the ice cream from us, and then she put it on the ground, and she made us sit around it and watch it melt in the sun. And when the ice cream was completely melted, that's when she went back into the house, and we were there like staring at this bucket of melted ice cream. And my sister Mago said, oh, forget her, I'm gonna eat it anyway. So then she's like scooped it up, and she started like, you know, drinking up this melted ice cream. And anyway, and I really loved that memory. You know, I love writing that chapter, I love the memory, but I had to take it out because the book was getting too long, and I had already established how evil my evil grandmother was. So that scene kind of was repetitive, so I had to take it out. But I saved it. I saved all my deleted scenes in a file. So then when I wrote the sequel to The Distance Between Us, you know, the sequel just came out, I was able to include that chapter in it as a flashback. So now you guys can read the sequel and read some of those scenes that I had to delete. Yeah.
At what point in your life did you decide you were going to write the book, or did it give you any type of emotional closure?
At what point in my life did I decide I was going to write this book? I wrote 2 novels before this one, and those novels were inspired by my own experiences, but I wasn't quite ready to write about myself yet and make myself, you know, so vulnerable on the page. So I use fiction as a way to still write about my experiences, but I created characters to stand in for me. And then when I learned how to write books and I felt more confident as a writer, I felt that I was ready to tackle this book. And also, when I started, you know, writing the book, the DREAM Act had failed to pass in Congress, and I was really angry that our political leaders had not passed the DREAM Act and allowed, you know, our undocumented youth the opportunities that they needed to be able to thrive in this society. And I was angry, so that gave me more motivation to write the story about what it's like to be an undocumented youth, what it's like, you know, to go through this experience of being an immigrant here in this country, and all the sacrifices that we have to make in order to have a better life and a better future. So because of that, I was able to then, you know, focus more on writing the book and being able to share it, and in a way, you know, through my story, try to help people understand our immigrant community a little bit more.
How did you cope with the feeling of missing a loved one?
How did I cope with the feeling of missing a loved one? I think it's really difficult to live your life, you know, especially like when you're a child and you don't have that support and the love that you need. And I think for me, what really helped me was having my siblings, because especially my older sister, like she really helped me when we were little to survive that situation when we didn't have our parents with us. And I'm really grateful to her because she got me through those moments when I didn't have my mom or my dad by my side.
In the book, you mentioned you wrote a journal. Do you still have it?
Do I still have my journals? I don't have all of them. I only have maybe one or two. I threw away a lot of journals because I was afraid that it would fall in the wrong hands. And I used my journals to express all of the stuff that I had inside and all the things that that I thought about and felt. And I worried that somebody was gonna find my journal and read it without permission. So what I would do is after I finished my journals, I would throw them away. And now I regret it. Now I wish I had kept them. But they served their purpose, and their purpose was for me to use these journals to express all of that turmoil that I was dealing with. And every time I sat down to write, I always felt better because I felt liberated from all of those emotions that I was carrying inside of me. I was taking them out of my body and putting them on paper. And all the hours that I spent journaling helped me to become a better writer as well. Because if you want to be a good writer, you need to write a lot. So I'm really grateful for my journals because they helped me become a better writer.
Did writing the book help with your trauma, or did it make it worse? And did it help process?
Oh yeah. No, that's what I love about writing is that, it helps you to come to terms with your trauma. You never fully overcome it, you never fully get over whatever things happen to you, but you learn how to live with it, you learn how to come to terms with it, you learn how to forgive yourself and forgive, other people who might have harmed you or hindered you. And that's what I love about writing, about art, dance, music. All of those are ways of self-expression, and you need to find a way to express all of the things that all the feelings that you have. Because as human beings, we are very emotional creatures. We feel deeply. And we need to find a way to express all of those feelings, because if you just keep them inside of you and you don't have an outlet for self-expression, a lot of times we end up either imploding or exploding, and we either harm ourselves or we hurt other people because we don't know how to cope with all of those emotions. So writing for me has really saved my life in that way, because every time I write, I'm able to put all of my emotions, especially the ugly ones, the anger, the hurt, the pain, I'm able to just put them on the page, and then that way I don't have to carry them inside of me where they can become toxic and just poison me. So by putting them on the page, it frees me up. It liberates me. It helps me to then make room for the good stuff, make room for joy and happiness and gratitude. So find a way, either through the arts, through sports, but find a way for you to also be able to get those emotions out in a way where you can transform them from something negative into something positive.
What kept you motivated through those difficult times in your life?
What kept me motivated? That's a really good question. What kept me motivated? I'm going to say that the biggest thing that was my source of motivation is not forgetting where I came from. And like I mentioned earlier, I come from a very poor family in a very poor town in Mexico. My state of Guerrero, where I'm from, 70% of people there live in extreme poverty.
What are your views on the immigration problems that have been going on recently?
What are my views on the immigration problems that have been going on recently? I would question the word recently, because I feel that these immigration problems have been happening throughout our history. And it's cyclical, you know, it comes and it goes. Things get better, then they get worse, then they get better, and then they go bad again. And, you know, I feel that through our history as a country, we have not learned from the mistakes that we've made. And there has always been discrimination, and there has always been racism, and groups, different groups of people have always been the scapegoats for whatever, you know, problems we have in this country. So it's something that we need to think about, our history, because what's happening right now, a lot of it, it's been influenced by what came before, what happened before. And it's not new, you know, all these deportations and family separations and all of that. If you think about, you know, what the Japanese went through when they were taken from their homes and put in, you know, internment camps, for example. Or when, you know, the Chinese people were kicked out during the Chinese Exclusion Act. All of a sudden, after they built the railroads, we didn't want them anymore, so we kicked them out of the country. Or when we saw, you know, when the Irish first got here, you know, did you guys know they were like the most unwanted immigrant group here? And nobody wanted them because they said the Irish were lazy and drunks and all of this other bad things about that group, and nobody wanted them here. And now we celebrate St. Patrick's Day. So it's something that has been recurring throughout our history. So we need to think about that and figure out a way, how can we come together as a country to make sure that we learn from all of those mistakes and that we stop doing that. And it doesn't help, of course, right now that we have a president who's constantly striving to create chaos and who's always trying to pitch one group against another, or bringing up all this, you know, anti-immigrant sentiments and all of this racism and all of these things. It doesn't help because he's our leader and he's supposed to set a good example for us. And he's the one who's supposed to set the tone, right, for what this country should be like. So when our leaders fail us, then we need to become those leaders. And you can become a leader in your own circles, you know, become a leader within your family, within your friends, in your school. Then you guys take on that role of leadership and you set the tone for what kind of society do you want to have. You have to fight for it. And it's really important for you guys to take a stand and to put in the work. You know, especially your generation, because your generation, you guys are growing up in a completely different environment than, you know, how I grew up, for example. And you need to make sure that the change that you want to see happening in the world, you need to create that change.
What are new struggles you see facing newer generations of immigrants? And what advice would you give?
What are the struggles I see? I think right now the most pressing struggle is having a government that is not open to helping our immigrants to succeed and thrive in this country. That's the struggle that we have right now. You know, which was very different from when I arrived. When I came here in 1985, we also had a Republican president like we do right now, but that Republican president, Ronald Reagan, was open to giving amnesty to our undocumented immigrants that were living here. So because of him, and he allowed 3 million people to remain in this country as legal residents. And my mother, who's here with us today, and my father, both were able to become legal residents because of that opportunity that Ronald Reagan gave them. So that's what I would like to see right now, but unfortunately, we don't have that. Right now, we have a government that's keeping the doors closed for our communities. But the one thing that my father always said to us when we were undocumented was, just because we're undocumented, it doesn't mean we cannot dream. And that's what I tell people right now who are in that situation. Keep dreaming, keep working hard, and be ready for any opportunity that might come up in the future. And I see you guys looking around for my mother, so I'm just gonna introduce her to you. Ma, los muchachos te quieren conocer. Ahí está mi mamá, mira.